Welcome everybody to the University of Applied Research and Development. This is Craig and our Leadership and Educators podcast. I'm delighted to have Dr. Linda Lee Davies, who is the Professor of International Business and Cross-Culture for Fairleigh Dickinson University at Roxley College. Hi, Dr. Linda.
Hello there. Thanks for having me.
So good to have you here. And what time of the day is it there for you?
Well, we're just after 6 p.m, so nice and comfortable. And then after this, I've got a nice relaxing yoga session just across the road in the school. So lovely evening.
Wonderful. Leaders need that to de-stress and get themselves recentered and move on from the day and go back to family and normal life. Is that what you normally do to recenter?
Yes, well, I do in when I'm teaching, so I do leadership consultancy, etc. as well. And one of the things is obviously you've got to know yourself and you've got to be relaxed. And there's so many things that can get us stressed out during the course of a day, so many. So I think it's very good for people to have their hobbies. Mine happens to be yoga, just tends to do it for me, meditation, gong baths, and what happens then is you just completely take your head out of the stress zone, but equally you clean it ready for something else. So if you want to go from delivery to writing an academic paper, you can change hats a little bit more effectively, I think, if you've got a vehicle to relax. So yes, that's what I do.
And you mentioned before we started recording that things have been challenging, obviously, for everyone as well with the pandemic. You've got a very unique program. So why don't you tell us about your program, what you do, and some of the challenges recently?
Yep, sure. Now, at Roxton College, which is a part of Fairleigh Dickinson University, it's an American university with several sites in the US and one in Canada. And then obviously we're the English campus. So we operate from this beautiful Jacobean Abbey near Banbury, in the village of Roxton, which you can imagine is a typical English village with all the thatched cottages and like a chocolate box cover. Really is lovely, and the manor is beautiful. And we then have American students over for 4 months at a time. And each of us on faculty, we will teach our special subjects. So mine happens to be international business and cross-culture, but they'll also study art, politics, basically the whole, sort of culture of Britain as well, in addition to history, which is very important, and of course, classical English, as well as creative writing. So they come over for that on their various courses, and then we each take the different cohorts as you would in any university. And what I do for the business side, international business and for cross-culture, is I tend to, because they're 20, they're sophomores, they come over and they do 4 months. They're going to be people that go back to uni for 2 years, to finish off in their junior and then senior year. And then I keep in contact with them on LinkedIn and everything. But then, of course, you've got to think, what leadership world are they going into? They don't necessarily want to hear what I did 20 years ago. 20 years ago I did this. It's irrelevant now. Some of it, in terms of character building, might be a nice little story. But really, we need to look at the world that they're going to be in. So the program that I do there, it would be part of their normal degree, their 4-year degree, the American 4-year degree. I will look at anything predictive. In international business, we might look at even things like RFID, human chipping, where might that go? In cross-cultural perspectives, we look at not just the country differences, but technological differences and how different age groups cope with technology. And indeed, we then focus in both in international business and in cross-culture. We will look at the differences between Boomer, Generation X, Generation Y stroke millennials, and obviously now Generation Z. And we'll be looking at how that works culturally. So when they go into their leadership positions, which they will do within, say, 4 or 5 years of leaving us, so by their mid-20s, they may be in charge of people my age. They might be in charge of people their own age. But how do they have an intergenerational leadership approach which doesn't leave anybody out? So they don't sort of disregard the oldies as they may see them. They value the way older people think, and they realise actually the two marry very, very well. I actually work really well with younger people because I understand that when I learned at school, I learned in a very two-dimensional way, a very linear, logical way. And that worked really, really well for me. And of course, I've developed, because I'm fairly techie, I have developed different 360-degree multi-platform understandings. But because I was educated in that more linear way, then what happens is I think and solve problems in that way. But if I work with a Gen Z student of, sort of 18, 19, 20, I can see that they are thinking in a multi-platform way already. So their brains are going like this, and that's why we work so well together. We think of things the other cannot. And so rather than an older person sort of belittling a younger person and bringing them in and thinking, right, you make the tea and work your way up, those days have gone. We have to understand that the two marry very well if you understand how to lead them. So I'd equally, as much as I've done consultancy here in Britain, helping older leaders understand Gen Z and millennial and mentality, the ways they want to be motivated, I equally work with our sophomores, and in the leadership part of it, I will push them towards thinking, how can you value people you may not even understand or you disregard as not being technological? How do you cope with things like that? And leadership is that was my doctorate anyway. So my doctorate was in leadership. So I go into looking at how leaders are going to be in the future. And that's threaded right through the culture, how people are going to live in a few years, in 10 years, and in 20 years. So we will cover in international business. We will cover, for instance, that our Apple Macs and other devices will in 5 years probably be becoming obsolete, and we'll be making fun of them, just as we make fun of the old-fashioned bricks that we used to carry around as mobiles, some years ago. And we'll be much more into the glasses and artificial intelligence and augmented reality. And that brings a whole different cultural perspective to how the job environment works. And equally, things like drones. We're already in Dubai, we're looking at drone taxis, we're looking at drone deliveries. Amazon here in the UK has just had, they're looking at the license that you have to get to do a 30-minute delivery from their fulfillment centres. Now, they've been waiting 5 years for that, because I started teaching about drones and Amazon 5 years ago, saying, look, this is what Amazon want to do, but they can't do it because of legalities. Now the legalities are going to come into place, and technology is going to make that world very different. So drone delivery, augmented reality, virtual reality, 3D printing, driverless cars, they're all going to make a massive impact. And so in international business and in the cross culture, we will actually have debates, Cambridge Union debates on the benefits and disadvantages of drones. So we'll set up the whole classroom and we'll actually give people roles, and we'll have a classic Cambridge Union debate, not quite like the university itself where they actually have doors for yes and no, ayes and nays, but we'll set it up and we'll go, this house believes, and we'll have a motion, and off we go. And we look at the pros and cons of the future of the technology so that we're really, really clear on how it's going to affect leadership, how it's going to affect international business, and look at what's happened recently with the pandemic. Wasn't it a good job we had all this technology? Imagine if it had happened 20 years ago and, we had dial-up. I don't know, the kids don't remember dial-up, but I remember sitting Pete, my son, who's now 23, on my knee when he was 3, and he used to go, can I dial the world up, mummy, with you? And, he would be really excited, but do you remember how slow it was? You could make a cup of coffee and do several other things while it connected. But imagine had the pandemic happened during those times, how much more limited. So we have technology on our side. We were able to transport our lectures over to Zoom when we had to send our students back. And how lucky was that? It might not be ideal, but we have that technology. And imagine within 10 years and plus, we will have, with the glasses, we'll be able to talk to those figures in real time in their environments, and we'll be able to answer the phone in the air, and we'll have Google Maps come up on the windscreen of the car or through the glasses. We won't have these extra devices. So you can see how much lovely, beautiful ammunition I've got for the teaching. It never runs out, because the minute you start trying to be familiar with one lot of technology, then another one comes along. And the students, when they're that age at 20, drink it up. So, the more that you can relate to their world, basically. And so instead of talking about our own world 20 years ago, and the odd little story is humorous, it's quite nice to put in a funny story of your experience, but they're not there to hear it, because actually, unlike us listening to our parents, them listening to us, it doesn't give them as much value. We're the last generation of where we start off with that history and work our way up. They are the first generation who come in with sometimes more expertise than some of the people there in the workplace. And I have got to look at how that's going to marry up when they do go to that workplace. And that's why I love my job so much, because you just see these students from all different disciplines, and you try to think about where the technology is going to take them.
That's
So
really
that gives you an
fascinating.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really great. I think something that I notice with the 18 to 21-year-olds is many of them, unless they've actually had a school or gone through education where laptops are everywhere and you work on your laptop, the phone is their device. It's their go-to device. They do everything on their device. And if you put them down in front of a laptop or a desktop computer, using word processing software and databases and spreadsheets and things like that is really quite foreign. And so we have this technological capacity, mostly in a phone though, in that sort of format, rather than the format that my generation might be used to and had to learn to be competent. So what are some of those distinctives then that a leader who has new workers, new team members come in who are millennials, what are some of the points we need to remember to be able to help them induct really well and be productive?
And, and I think if I take you back to that sort of difference between 2D and 3D thinking, I think once you understand that, you can then make a much better relationship. You begin to see that they see things in a much more 360 kind of way, and that can be really useful to you. And I think the biggest tip is never treat them as if they're just very new and about to make the tea. And I think we've got to get away from those days. And unfortunately, there are still companies out there that, right, that's it, you're the fresher, in you come, and this is what you do, make the tea or coffee. And I actually was very fortunate. I worked for a recruitment company before coming into academia. And I used to run, it's called Reed Accountancy, but it's part of a Reed Personnel. So it was a national recruitment company. It's very large, it's about $1 billion turnover nowadays. And I used to run Edinburgh to London branches. And I worked for the original Mr. Reed, who is called Reed, and he was just marvellous. He's about 80-something now. And he said to me, always the most precious thing in your business are the new, young, fresh eyes that come into it. And if you as a leader are directing a whole, because you get higher and higher up into your ivory tower, don't you? And suddenly life becomes spreadsheets and profits and etc. So he always reminded us to go right back to the front line and what it was like to just start for the very first day, and to look at those fresh new people coming in, and they could see things that you can't. And I think if there's a biggest tip for a leader that I've got, particularly as I've seen it all over the years now with the consultancy and the teaching in leadership, stop yourself from getting too far up yourself in the ivory tower. Remember, we used to call it management by wandering around, back in the 80s, etc. But remember that you've actually, the most important people coming in will tell you how your market changes. They will tell you more about your business and about your future custom than your spreadsheets. And so if you do want to make a success of your company, you need the freshest, most immediate amount of information and data. And in some companies, particularly in the UK, where they still have some of those traditional, right, you start at the bottom and you work your way through lots of different levels of leader. Well, how do you know that not what some of those leaders aren't a little bit dishonest and steal the ideas of the youngsters? And as those youngsters come in with those lovely ideas, if you don't capture them, or if someone steals them, it could lose the idea, and you could also lose the youngster. And that's, and then they go to the competition, and the competition might embrace them and have the fresh new ideas, so that the whole company can align to the future. So in order for us to be effective leaders and for us to have successful companies, and look at the environment we're working in now, we've got to have innovative, creative thinking and disrupt. The Netflix, the Ubers, etc., or somebody somewhere started thinking differently, and it would have been somebody most likely fresh and new to that business. Wasn't it Netflix that had gone to Blockbuster originally with the idea and got refused? Well, if you're not open to a new way of doing something. So I would say that the best lesson in leadership is to be approachable, really get to know the new people joining your company, and really get to know the markets they come from, because they're the future customers and they'll know how people buy. So it's no use teaching them, the ways in which you've learned, and particularly now with technology being so fast moving, they, like you say, they're much more, phone led than they are laptop led. So you have to think, well, how are they going to do different things? And even in higher education, I'm a great advocate of bring your own device to my sessions. So I would rather than give them a case study, which is already out of date, because by the time we've printed it and given it to them, we're already behind the times. I would rather they research something absolutely on the spot. So if they want to look up Elon Musk and what he's doing now, that's great. Not a case study about him 2 years ago. So that way, their fresh, bright young minds get to go and find out things that are interesting and sexy to them. They can then bring that into if you've got like some of the traditional classic theories to teach them, you don't then have to say this theory has got 6 parts and you've got to remember it. You can get away from that. You can actually just get them to use the theory to underpin some fresh, lovely, new, interesting reading that they've gone out and they want to research in areas of interest to them. So I think that happens in academia. It should happen in academia, and it should happen in the workplace. And let people, the other thing with leaders now, I would say give them time to be creative, because there's nothing like a fine young mind let loose. And don't make fun of any ideas. Every idea is a good idea, even if you think it's a little bit obvious, because for every 100 ideas, there will be the one magical idea that might make the business different and align it up, because we've got some fairly interesting times ahead for business. None of us really know exactly what's going to happen. And I think if you keep an absolute edge on those young people coming in, and then you look after very carefully the sage in your company, so you don't then do that at the expense of those who are older, but you make a really big effort to have an intergenerational approach. So it's what some of the things I've written about in the past with other authors, team-based mixed realities. So we talk about augmented reality, we talk about virtual reality, and those are all very good and our future. But you have to, as a leader, have a team-based approach. You can't just make it highly techy and interesting for the youngsters. You have to make sure that your 50-something, 60-year-old is also valued, because they will also have a very good angle on your business. So the youngsters will know where to turn it, and the more experienced people will be able to help them do that, because the youngsters won't necessarily know how to do it. They'll know what you need to do in order to serve them and the human beings that they go on to grow in the future. And then those who are older. So that's, I think, the leadership challenge now is really interesting, because you've got up to 4, maybe even 5 generations in the workplace, but definitely 3 or 4. And the leadership skills, you would have to be able to mix that and be appealing to that. And that, you see, some people can do it, any age. Young leaders can cope with all generations. Some older leaders can cope with all generations. But unfortunately, some cannot. And, and they're still, I think, out there, particularly in the UK, in traditionally run companies, they're still very much, oh, you're young, you can't possibly know what it is that we're going to need. And I think we have to be careful of that. We have to capture that youth and enthusiasm and value the sage within the company.
I really hope that people will be taking notes while they're watching this and while they're listening to you, Linda. I've got down to give people time to be creative, to use more current events rather than traditional case studies or ideas, seek advice from the younger team members, esteem and build intergenerational connection in the workplace, and to forget traditional career structures or prior knowledge that people need to have to move up. Does it capture some of your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I am seeing in quite a few companies, because I still keep a good tab on I'm a commercial academic, so I keep a tab on what's happening in business. And I'm seeing more and more communication environments where it's quite possible, as someone starting at the lower levels, to be in direct contact with the CEO. Many of the modern cultures are now saying, if you want to contact us directly, you can. And, and I think there's value in that. And it stops then that danger, because all companies can have them, those leaders that are, if you like, coercive, drive by fear, steal ideas, and that can actually put people off. So actually the CEO isn't making the right decisions for the next 5-year strategic plan, because the information never got to him or her. So it's, so you have to make sure that that information can get right to the top, and equally the top information can cascade right through and is fair. So I'm actually seeing much more equality in the workplace than the old-fashioned linear through the layers. I think the old-fashioned pyramids that we have, and okay, you do have to have leaders, don't get me wrong, but they have to be more facilitative than
Right.
than directing and just saying, right, you must do this. That's gone. For the future, you have to be helping people come up with their own ideas, and sometimes even helping them, make them feel it was their own idea in the first place, even if you've given them a little push. But making it an open environment where they feel comfortable to be creative. Look at what the World Economic Forum, etc., is saying. If a robot can do your job in the next 10 years, change. The skills that we really will be needing in the workplace will be creativity, innovation, empathy, facilitative leadership. The different things that can be done by a robot. We don't need to be memory retentive anymore. We don't need to be repetitive in anything we do. That can all be done by technology.
Yeah, I think the term that we've been using in our course is the technologically illiterate, the people who come in with that lack of understanding and where things are going. Dr. Linda, just in the last couple of minutes we have left, for someone who is an aspiring leader looking to make their first leadership move or to move to the next level, what would be one piece of advice you might give them as they prepare for the next role or the next level?
Okay, so I would, if you're going for a particular company, for instance, I think the word I would use is predictive. So rather than just go in there and apply for whatever the role is, or to look for that leadership role, also look at where it might be in 5 or 10 years. And in that way, you can give at interview a little bit of extra energy, because instead of then fighting for what is current, which everybody going for that role will do, if you look ahead to the future and you are sitting there with lots of lovely ideas for the future and what you could do, then you're going to be a little bit more, if you like, fresh I know you are fresh when you're younger, looking for leadership, but you're going to be even more dynamic. Yeah, you're going to be more dynamic than your competitors. And so I think that, when you're thinking about how you come across, the other thing I would do is I would look at how you come across, because so many different interviews are on Zoom now. And it's okay to have a few ticks, etc. All of these presentation, sort of things, don't do this, don't do that. We're human. And I think the pandemic has helped us understand that we are in people's homes. We might have the dog pop up on the screen at any moment, and things like that. But obviously for your interview, you want it professional, but don't be afraid to really practice just being natural. And then that way, so rather than sort of sit like a rabbit in headlights and do the whole thing, like, do you see what I mean? So you're looking at, so you're predictive and looking forward to what you can offer, but equally you're looking at how you might come across on the different technological platforms that have to be used, because, particularly because many of the panel interviews are done on big screen. And we see ourselves in the little yellow bordered box, but actually a lot of the different leadership roles, etc., if you're doing an interview remotely, you're on big screen and they can absolutely see, so you need to be just relaxed so that people don't sort of just, you don't see that you're too conscious of yourself. And then also be predictive. Look at the way that you come across, but equally look at what they can do for you. So what you're doing is you're creating a marriage. So you are saying, look, these are the skills I've got, and I'm fresh and I'm new and exciting and I can bring this to your company. But then equally say that you can get something from them. You're looking forward to the leadership development. You're looking forward to working in a culture. You've done your research. You've branded any presentation with their logos. You've dressed yourself in a way that company would expect, etc. So what you're doing is you're creating, because the interview is also, the leadership role interview is also you interviewing them. And I think people forget that. Yes, the company wants to look for somebody good, but equally it's important that you think, is this the right role for me? And then that way, so if you're predictive, aware of how you might come across on different platforms, and you also then think of a union between the two rather than you pitching, I think that gives you a better chance.
Fantastic. Dr. Linda Lee Davies, really want to thank you for your time and being with us today.
Absolute pleasure.